Some Jedi Masters leave their mark on the galaxy through grand battles and legendary duels. Others shape history through quiet wisdom and unwavering conviction. Qui-Gon Jinn did both. Before he discovered Anakin Skywalker, before he faced a Sith Lord on the plains of Naboo, he was just a boy from Coruscant, drawn to the Force like a tree bends toward light. Born around 80 years before the Battle of Yavin, Qui-Gon entered a galaxy still gilded by peace. The Republic stood tall. The Jedi Order thrived as its vigilant guardians. It was an age where hope still whispered in the Senate halls, and the shadows that would one day rise remained hidden. Like many children born with the spark of the Force in their blood, Qui-Gon was found early. He was brought to the Jedi Temple, a place of solemn wonder and silent discipline, where childhood surrendered itself to duty. Within those ancient walls of Durasteel and tradition, Qui-Gon was placed in the Helios clan. Among other bright younglings, he took his first steps into the larger world of the Jedi, under the watchful eye of Master Terra Sinub. He studied the foundations of lightsaber combat to liberate steps on a path that would one day lead him to parry the strikes of a Sith Lord. But the Jedi path was never solely about the blade. It was about sensing the invisible current of the galaxy, about stillness, about listening at the age of 12, the day every youngling dreams of and dreads finally arrived. He was chosen as a Padawan learner. His new master, Dooku, towering, brilliant, intimidating. That night, Qui-Gon lingered with his youngling friends. They stayed up late, laughing quietly, imagining the adventures ahead. He practiced with his training lightsaber until Master Yaddle firmly ordered him to bed. But sleep did not come. Not that night. Not when tomorrow meant everything would change. The next morning, standing outside Dooku's quarters, Qui-Gon was filled with a deep, quiet terror. Not fear of Dooku, but of failing, of not being enough. When his new master sensed his anxiety and pressed him to explain it, Qui-Gon paused and looked inward. He spoke the truth. Dooku was impressed. Few Padawans dared admit fear. Fewer still could understand its roots to help the boy grow comfortable. With the temple he would now call home, Dooku gave him a full tour. They visited the Padawan sparring dojo, where knights honed their skills. The great assembly room, where decisions echoing across the galaxy were made. The meditation chambers, which Qui-Gon found peaceful, though somewhat dull. But it was the arboretum that enchanted him, a garden of life collected from thousands of worlds, humming with quiet energy. Their final stop was the Jedi Archives. There, something caught Qui-Gon's eye, an old holocronant like the others. Its edges seemed worn by time, yet it pulsed with mystery. When he asked about it, Dooku's demeanor darkened. That holocron contained Jedi prophecies, he explained. Forbidden teachings. The Jedi no longer studied them too. Many had strayed into darkness, chasing their meanings. It was Qui-Gon's first encounter with the prophecy holocron, but it would not be his last. Only 4 months into his apprenticeship, he faced his first real test. The Jedi Council dispatched him and Dooku to Shu-Torron, where a battle raged. As their shuttle rocked under fire, Qui-Gon tried to steady his thoughts by watching his master so poised. So unshaken at Primus Base, Qui-Gon met Rael Aver, first Padawan, now a Jedi Knight and a famed lightsaber duelist. While Dooku conferred with generals, Rael offered something Qui-Gon hadn't expected: warmth, understanding. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and told him the truth. Dooku could be hard to read, hard to reach. If Qui-Gon ever had questions, he could come to him instead. He even offered to spar with him. That small act, that simple gesture, meant everything. In Rail, Qui-Gon saw a guide, someone to help him cross the bridge from fearful learner to future knight, and it was Rail who later reintroduced Qui-Gon to the forbidden prophecies. One quiet evening, as Qui-Gon worked on a tedious assignment in Dooku's quarters, something dry and philosophical on Jedi Theosopherel arrived unannounced. Grinning at the boy's boredom, he offered to show him something actually worth knowing. Back in the archives, they examined the same prophecy holocron that had so captivated him months ago. The ancient words were mesmerizing, visions of what could be, of chosen ones, of balance, of endings. When Qui-Gon mentioned Dooku's stern warning to avoid these teachings, Rail raised an eyebrow. According to him, Dooku had once been obsessed with the prophecy holocron, able to put it down. That revelation left Qui-Gon confused. What had changed? Why had his master turned so completely away? Over time, Qui-Gon built bonds with many Jedi. He was known for his kindness to newcomers, for helping younglings adjust to the life that would one day consume them. Compassion came easily to him, a trait that would define him, even as others warned against attachment. Around 58, after years of training, Qui-Gon finally became a Jedi Knight. He was no longer bound to Dooku now. His path was his own, and he would make it his own. He believed in the living force not just as a concept, but as a presence, a whisper, a will. He listened to it more than he listened to orders, and it would lead him down paths few dared tread. 60 years before the Battle of Yavin, newly knighted, Qui-Gon faced his most personal trial. On a mission to the wild planet Felucia, he encountered something wholly unexpected: love, deep, physical, unmistakable. It ran contrary to every Jedi teaching, but he could not stop it. Would not. For a time, he stood on the edge, heart in one hand, lightsaber in the other. Would he leave the Order, or would he stay? In the end, he remained loyal to the Jedi, but he kept a tokener crystalline gemstone given to him during that secret, fleeting relationship. He carried it with him for 20 years, tucked inside a pouch on his belt. Only later, when the time was right, did he pass it on to two unlikely companions, Pax Merifer and Rhaera Wick. The memory remained, and it shaped him. The code, he believed, was not scripture. It was a path, but one each Jedi must walk in their own way. His journey continued. More trials followed, more doubts. He continued to work with his former master on missions, including one to hunt the infamous bounty hunter Shen Damol. During that operation, Qui-Gon was captured, held at Black. Death hovered close. Dooku saved him, but he did so by unleashing force, lightning raw, cruel, unmistakably dark. The sight of it cracked something in Qui-Gon. His master, the Jedi he admired, using the power of the Sith. Shaken, he shared his concerns with Rail. But Rail was unconcerned. It was necessary, he said. Dooku did what he had to. Still, something had shifted. A seed of doubt had been planted. That doubt grew during a mission to rescue the kidnapped son of Senator Dagonet. When they arrived, Qui-Gon and Dooku realized the truth. The boy hadn't been taken by criminals, but by desperate villagers left starving by the senator's greed. When Dagonet arrived with fire in his eyes and an army at his back, he threatened to burn the entire village to ash. Dooku, enraged, began to choke the senator with the Force. He nearly killed him, but Qui-Gon acted. He calmed the fire, released the boy, found peace without blood. Afterward, in a rare moment of vulnerability, Dooku commended his student's wisdom. He admitted that Qui-Gon had seen more clearly than he had. Not all of Qui-Gon's adventures were so dire. On a lighter assignment, He and Dooku were asked to attend the Dragonfire Air Rally on Coruscant's social, diplomatic affair. Their role was simple: represent the Jedi, make a good impression on the Candavant ambassador. But even here, secrets stirred. During the race, one of the pilots, a man named Ramel, crashed. Qui-Gon was stunned to learn he was Dooku's brother. Investigating the incident, they discovered sabotage. The official investigator was in on it. Following the trail, they uncovered corruption that stretched deep to a crime boss named Synaxa. And deeper still, Synaxa had a spy within the Jedi Council. Master Brillin had been compromised, blackmailed because of her greatest secret, a son. Arth, Tarx, Dooku's old classmate. When the truth came to light, Brillin was removed from the council. Her seat given to Dooku. Qui-Gon's path kept evolving. Along the way, he forged friendships beyond the Order. Among his closest companions was a Wookiee named Brennak. Twice, Brennak saved Qui-Gon's life. During the second rescue, Qui-Gon felt they had saved each other. A sacred bond was born. He later met another Wookiee, Balthasar, and formed a deep reverence for their culture. Years later, he would bring his own Padawan, Obi-Wan Kenobi, to Kashyyyk to witness the Wookiee celebration of Life Day. Every experience added a thread to Qui-Gon's tapestry. Every challenge, every connection, every moment of doubt and clarity shaped the Jedi he would become. He came to believe that following the spirit of the Jedi Code mattered more than the letter, that rigid adherence could become a prison. He argued, often alone, that each Jedi must interpret the code for themselves. He listened not to politics, nor to pride, but to the Force. The Council called him defiant, rebellious, but he knew what he was. He was simply faithful to the living Force. And long before he found a boy named Anakin, long before he dueled a phantom cloaked in crimson eyes and shadowed blade, Qui-Gon Jinn walked the long, winding road of quiet trials, forging his path with truth, compassion, and the unshakable belief that the Force had a will of its own and he must follow where it led. And by the book he was. Obi-Wan Kenobi respected the Jedi Council deeply, almost reverently. He believed in following their directives to the letter. Qui-Gon Jinn, as we've seen, took a more independent path. Where Obi-Wan saw structure, Qui-Gon saw limitations. And while Obi-Wan believed his master could have earned a seat on the Jedi Council if only he followed the rules more closely, Qui-Gon seemed entirely uninterested in such titles or honors. His eyes were always fixed, not on rank, but on truth. Their training sessions often returned to the same theme, what Qui-Gon called the living Force, not the distant echoes of the future or the echoes of the past, but the energy breathing in all living things in the now. One memory stands out: a visit to a wild plain teeming with native creatures. Qui-Gon used the moment to teach his apprentice how the Force flowed through everything, how the present moment was alive, sacred. Obi-Wan, studious and methodical, sometimes struggled to accept these teachings. Their differing approaches, their clashing temperaments, created tension. But underneath it all, a bond was forming. Qui-Gon had an uncanny ability to sense when Obi-Wan was unsettled. It proved useful on missions, but frustrating in daily life. Obi-Wan could rarely hide his emotions, his irritation, his doubts. Qui-Gon always knew, and sometimes Obi-Wan resented that their bond would face a true test in 40 years before the Battle of Yavin. After a troubled mission to the planet Piale, Qui-Gon returned to Coruscant to find surprising news awaiting him. The Jedi Council had offered him a seat. Master Polydeparsian was stepping down, and they wanted Qui-Gon to take his place. The offer shocked him. Given his frequent disagreements with the council, he never expected such an invitation. And while part of him felt honored, another part hesitated, because accepting the seat meant he would have to pass Obi-Wan's training to another master. Perhaps that would have eased some of their growing friction. But the thought of leaving his Padawan behind filled Qui-Gon with guilt. He hadn't even told Obi-Wan yet when a new crisis erupted on the Inner Rim. World of Pijal, a performance troupe known as the Opposition, had begun staging political pranks, protesting an upcoming treaty signing. But their demonstrations were becoming violent. The treaty would end Pial's monarchy, allow the world to join the Republic, and shift power toward the corporate giant Churka Corporation. Qui-Gon's old friend Rael Averos requested help resolving the situation. The timing was far from ideal. When Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan met with Supreme Chancellor Ki-Ramez Kai-Um, Obi-Wan learned about the council's offer, but not from his master. Someone else told him first. The shame Qui-Gon felt was heavy and silent. He tried to apologize, but Obi-Wan met him with uncharacteristic sarcasm. Their journey to Pial began under a cloud. There, they found Rael serving as advisor to Crown Princess Fanry, a 14-year-old heir to the throne. As they investigated the opposition, they crossed paths with two jewel thieves, Pox, Marifa and Rahera Wick. Despite Pox's hostility, the Jedi enlisted them to help uncover the truth. The deeper they looked, the more Qui-Gon saw. He had a vision of the treaty signing turning into a massacre. When he met with the opposition's leader, Hail Azuka, he learned they had been framed. Though they had peacefully opposed the treaty, the violence attributed to them was the work of someone else. The someone was Princess Fanry. She had created a secret military group, the Black Guards, and orchestrated the chaos to frame the opposition and restore full monarchy to Pial. At her coronation, she rejected the treaty and the Republic, preparing to attack Churka ships. Despite the innocent slaves aboard, Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, Pax, and Rahera acted swiftly. They intervened, they saved the helpless. And when the dust settled, Qui-Gon made his decision. He declined the council seat. He would stay. He would finish Obi-Wan's training. A quiet choice, but one that would echo through the galaxy. Their greatest test still lay ahead. Between 41 and 39 BBY, Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan were sent to Mandalore. Civil war had erupted. The world's martial traditionalists were fighting a reformist faction. The new Mandalorians, led by Duchess Satine Kryze. She had become a target, and the Jedi were tasked with protecting her. For a full year, they lived on the run, hunted by bounty hunters, never certain of the next day's sunrise. They ate what they could find, slept in borrowed corners of the galaxy, and somewhere in those months, Obi-Wan fell in love. Qui-Gon noticed. Of course he did, though the Jedi forbade attachments. Qui-Gon did not judge. He understood. And when the war ended, when Satine took the throne, she said nothing. Obi-Wan would have stayed if she had asked. But she never did. Around 41 BBY, Qui-Gon took his Padawan on what he called a training exercise. But it was more. He brought Obi-Wan to Kashyyyk, to the village of his old friend Brennok, for the Wookiee celebration of Life Day. When they arrived, Obi-Wan questioned the purpose. Qui-Gon simply smiled. He wanted Obi-Wan to feel the energy of the world too. Sense the Force, not in meditation, but in wind and root and soil. When Brennok saw Qui-Gon, she embraced him with joy and gave Obi-Wan the same welcome. But celebration turned to crisis. Another Wookiee, Balthus, had gone missing. Before they could search, Trojan hunters attacked, capturing Wookiees with nets. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan fought bravely, but Qui-Gon was taken. As he was dragged away, he turned to his Padawan and said simply, "The rescue was now in your hands." Qui-Gon, ever the negotiator, tried to reason with the Trojan leader, Qui-Gon. But Qui-Gon wanted more. He wanted Obi-Wan too. When Obi-Wan arrived, pretending to surrender, it was a ruse. Using the Force, he freed his master. Together, and with the help of the Wookiees, they defeated the hunters and freed the captives. At last, they returned to the village. The celebration began, as it was always meant to, around 40 BBY. The two Jedi were operating near a planet occupied by the Fleshmongers, pirate syndicate. Flying their Delta 7 south, they received a message from Jedi Master Yoda. He was on the surface. He needed help. They landed and found that Yoda had already defeated the entire gang alone. He had come for a Force-sensitive infant named Lo. Yoda asked them to escort the child to the temple. As they departed, Yoda whispered to Lo that he was in safe hands with Qui-Gon.Obi-1. Meanwhile, was still stunned by the ancient master's strength, but Qui-Gon noticed something else. Yoda was troubled. The old Jedi confessed he had sensed a disturbance in the Force, a calling. He would follow it alone into the unknown Vagadar system. In 37 BBY, Qui-Gon faced a new crisis, not on a battlefield, but in his heart. He struggled with what the Jedi had become, how they were seen. On Coruscant, many citizens saw Jedi as soldiers, or worse, political servants. Where had the spirit gone? The turmoil came to a head during a mission to Brienne. He and Obi-Wan were sent to negotiate between Priestess Tur of the Wood and the Metal Clan. But the Metal Clan attacked, seeking to cut down the sacred forests. Qui-Gon escaped with the priestess, bringing her to Coruscant. There, she demanded blood. She wanted him to strike down every member of the Metal Clan. When Qui-Gon explained that this was not the Jedi way, she called him a coward, not because he refused violence, but because he failed to match the legend, the myth of Jedi as warriors. The words cut deep, not because they hurt his pride, but because they revealed how far the myth had strayed from truth. Seeking clarity, Qui-Gon followed the Force to an unnamed world. There, he entered a dark temple. Inside, he had a vision. He fought and killed red-hued enemies, only to see they were Jedi. As they fell, darkness consumed him. He woke, shaken, but awakened. The Force was showing him something sacred. That balance cannot be found in violence. That peace is not passive, but active. It is choice and discipline and faith. He returned to Coruscant and helped the priestess find a peaceful way forward. No swords, no blood. These years shaped everything. Not just Qui-Gon's evolving view of the Jedi, but his bond with Obi-Wan. Together they had faced politicians, assassins, pirates, and seers. Master and apprentice, different in method but bound in respect, in trust. And then came the moment that changed everything. In 32 BBY, a crisis bloomed. The Trade Federation blockaded Naboo. Officially, it was overtaxation of trade routes. But Qui-Gon felt something deeper, a disturbance in the Force. Acting on intuition, he brought Obi-Wan to the archives. They studied Senate documents, looking for patterns. Obi-Wan grew restless, but Qui-Gon pressed on. This wasn't just taxation, this was control. Someone was moving pieces behind a veil. When the blockade solidified, Supreme Chancellor Valorum sent negotiators, not diplomats, but Jedi. Qui-Gon and Obi-1. They boarded the Trade Federation command ship, tasked with peace. But peace was never the plan. In the conference room, waiting for Viceroy Newt Gunray, Qui-Gon sensed fear strong, unnatural. Then came betrayal. The room flooded with poison gas. The Federation tried to kill them. The Jedi held their breath, survived, and escaped through the ship's ventilation system. In the hangar, they saw the truth. This was an invasion. Naboo would fall unless someone intervened. They stowed away on separate landing craft, heading for the surface. What began as a diplomatic errand had become the opening act of a galactic storm. On the surface, Qui-Gon ran through the dense Naboo forests. From the underbrush leapt a strange figure, a Gungan named Jar Jar Binks, clumsy, fearful, unpredictable. But Qui-Gon saved him from an oncoming troop transport, and by Gungan custom, this created a life debt. Jar Jar was bound to him, no matter how often Qui-Gon tried to send him away. Jar Jar followed. Soon, they reunited with Obi-Wan. They needed shelter. Information Jar Jar hesitantly offered to take them to the underwater Gungan city, despite having been exiled from it. Let me know when you're ready for the next poetic rewrite of the underwater journey. The Queen's escape, and the first steps toward Tatooine and Anakin Skywalker, and would face punishment for returning. But left with no better options, the Jedi convinced him to guide them anyway. In the magnificent underwater city, where coral architecture shimmered like submerged temples, they were immediately apprehended and brought before Boss Nass, the Gungan leader. Qui-Gon attempted to warn him of the Trade Federation's looming threat. But generations of mistrust between the Gungans and the surface-dwelling Naboo made Boss Nass indifferent to their plight. Seeing no other way forward, Qui-Gon gently pressed the Force into the Gungan's mind, using a Jedi mind trick to sway him. It worked. Boss Nass agreed to lend them transportation, a sleek bongo submarine, and allowed Jar Jar to guide them through the treacherous depths of Naboo's core to reach the capital. The journey through the planet's watery heart was anything but safe. As they passed through black caverns and glowing depths, sea monsters rose from the shadows, each predator larger than the last. But as Qui-Gon calmly observed, there was always a bigger fish. Despite these perils, they reached the surface only to find the capital already under Federation control, moving like phantoms through the occupied city. The Jedi located Queen Amidala and her retinue as they were being led away by battle droids. In a swift and decisive rescue, Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan freed the Queen, her handmaidens, and several guards. Together, they fought their way to the royal hangar, commandeered a ship, and blasted through the blockade. But the escape came at a cost. Their hyperdrive was damaged, leaving them unable to reach Coruscant. They needed a place for repairs. Qui-Gon, ever guided by the will of the Force, suggested Tatooine, a dusty outer rim world under the thumb of the Hutts, and far from the reach of either Republic or Federation. Despite Captain Panaka's concerns about the dangers that awaited them there, they set course for the desert planet. Once landed, Qui-Gon ventured into the nearest settlement, in search of the parts they needed. He brought Jar Jar and a handmaiden named Padma along, who insisted on seeing the world herself. Unknown to Qui-Gon, this wasn't just any handmaiden, it was Queen Amidala herself. Traveling under disguise, while a decoy remained aboard the ship. In the cluttered spaceport of Mos Espa, they found a junk shop run by a squat, flapping-winged Toydarian named Watto. The shop had what they needed, a hyperdrive generator, but Watto scoffed at Qui-Gon's Republic credits, and when Qui-Gon tried to persuade him with a Jedi mind trick, he quickly learned that Toydarians were immune to such influence. And yet, In that dusty, cluttered shop, surrounded by rusted droids and scrap metal, Qui-Gon met someone unexpected. A boy, a slave, Anakin Skywalker. There was something about him, an energy, a presence that Qui-Gon couldn't explain, but couldn't ignore. When a sudden sandstorm swept across the settlement, Anakin generously offered the strangers shelter. In his home, in the modest slave quarters, Qui-Gon met Shmi Skywalker, Anakin's mother. And as the Jedi observed the boy, his instincts, his reflexes, the way he seemed to see things before they happened, he began to sense something extraordinary. The Force flowed through Anakin, like a river uncontained. Anakin had built a though no human had ever been known to pilot one and survive, and he offered to race it to win the parts the Jedi needed. A bold gesture, but one that stirred something in Qui-Gon's spirit. The plan took form quickly. Qui-Gon struck a deal with Watto to enter Anakin into the upcoming Boonta Eve Classic. He claimed the Padrasa as his own, concealing that Anakin had built it with his own hands. If the boy won, Watto would hand over the parts. If he lost, the Jedi's ship would be forfeited. A perilous gamble. But Qui-Gon's faith in the Force and in the boy was unshaken. While helping Anakin prepare for the race, Qui-Gon quietly took a blood sample. He sent it to Obi-Wan aboard the ship for testing. The results were beyond belief. Over 20,000 midichlorians per cell. Higher than any Jedi, even Master Yoda. Shmi's next words only deepened the mystery. She said, Anakin had no father. She had carried him, given birth to him, but he had simply come to be, as though the Force itself had breathed life into her womb. To Qui-Gon, this was no coincidence. It was destiny. He had studied the ancient prophecies, long dismissed by the Jedi Council, and now he believed this boy might be the chosen one, being foretold to bring balance to the Force. Before the race, Qui-Gon returned to Watto with another wager. If Anakin won, Watto would free the boy. The Toitarian begrudgingly agreed, but only to free one slave, leaving it to chance which it would be. As Watto flipped a chance cube, Qui-Gon subtly nudged it with the Force, ensuring the cube landed in Anakin's favor. The Boonta Eve Classic was brutal. Speeds that defied reason. Racers who sabotaged and killed. Yet Anakin held steady. Despite the odds, despite the danger, despite everything thrown at him, he won. He crossed the finish line, a victor, his heart pounding, his fate forever changed. Watto, fuming and defeated, handed over the parts. Anakin was free. But not Shmi. The deal had not included her. And that cruel truth weighed on Qui-Gon. He had given Anakin freedom, but left his mother in chains. There was a tearful farewell. Shmi kissed her son goodbye, holding back the tide of sorrow with a mother's strength. Anakin clutched a small gift she gave him and stepped onto the path that would change the galaxy. He left Tatooine with Qui-Gon, full of hope, fear, and unspoken promise. But destiny had one more turn waiting in the desert. As they approached their ship, a dark figure appeared, hooded, silent, and lethal. A red lightsaber sprang to life. Darth Maul, the Sith, a myth, a nightmare, now made real. Qui-Gon engaged him without hesitation. The duel was fierce and swift. Each move a blur of light and shadow. The Sith fought like a storm, precise, unrelenting. Qui-Gon held his own, but knew the battle could not be won there. When the ship's ramp descended, he leaped aboard, breathless, narrowly escaping death. Back aboard, Qui-Gon introduced Anakin to Obi-Wan and contacted the Jedi Council. His words were weighty to discoveries that could shake the foundations of the Order itself. The Sith had returned, and the Chosen One had been found. Let me know when you're ready for the continuation on Coruscant and through the power generator complex. The battle raged in a dance of light and darkness, winding through corridors of humming machinery and perilous catwalks. Qui-Gon Jinn moved with the calm grace that had always defined him, his blade guided not by rigid form, but by the living force itself. He trusted in the present moment, letting intuition rather than tradition lead his strikes. Obi-Wan Kenobi, younger, faster, more technically precise, moved in tandem with his master, the rhythm of their lightsabers rising in harmony against the storm of the dark side. Then came the moment that would change everything. Maul, with fierce precision, drove them apart, knocking Obi-Wan down to a lower level and activating a set of ray shields. They flared to life in searing light, trapping the Padawan behind an impenetrable barrier of energy. And so, for those critical moments, Qui-Gon Jinn stood alone before the Sith. Throughout their confrontations, Qui-Gon's unique philosophy had never wavered. Where others bent beneath the weight of council dogma, he remained firm in his belief. In the Force's will, he was never afraid to defy convention. He protected Jar Jar Binks when others scoffed. He fought for Anakin's future when others hesitated. And he followed the current of the Force even when it pulled him away from everything the Jedi Order held sacred. Obi-Wan had struggled with this, his master's defiance, his fierce independence, but in the depths of his heart, he respected it. And it was that same spirit that had led Qui-Gon to see what no one else did, the return of the Sith and the emergence of the Chosen One. Even here, in the heart of battle, as he faced a Sith Lord alone, Qui-Gon held true to himself. He did not fight with hatred. He did not fall to fear. He fought to protect, to defend those who could not defend themselves. And in doing so, he embodied the purest truth of what it meant to be a Jedi. As Obi-Wan waited behind the barrier, helpless, the energy shields cycling at regular intervals, Qui-Gon found stillness. He dropped to his knees and closed his eyes, meditating in the eye of the storm. On the other side, Maul paced like a predator, but Qui-Gon was at peace, centered in the Force. Even with death looming, he found serenity. When the shields dropped, the storm resumed. Maul struck with renewed fury, fueled by the dark side. Qui-Gon, though seasoned and wise, found himself giving ground. The years weighed on him. His technique formed for a true demanded strength and stamina, and his opponent was younger, faster, more feral. Still, he pressed on, dueling across catwalks, past yawning pits, through the shadowed labyrinth of the palace generator complex. Above, Obi-Wan sprinted forward each time the ray shields dropped, pushing to rejoin his master. But with every cycle, he arrived just too late, and then it happened. Maul found his opening. After relentless observation, he had learned Qui-Gon's rhythm, found the vulnerability in his defense. As their lightsabers clashed, Maul lashed out with the hilt of his weapon, slamming it into Qui-Gon's face. It was just a split second, just long enough. The red blade flashed forward, and with a violent hiss of energy, it pierced Qui-Gon's torso. Time slowed. Qui-Gon gasped. His eyes widened in shock and pain. He stumbled back, breath faltering, as Maul withdrew the blade. Obi-Wan screamed in silence, still trapped behind the last ray shield, his heart fracturing as he watched his master fall. When the shield dropped, the Padawan surged forward, grief and rage coiled in his chest like a firestorm. His blade ignited with ferocity, and he launched into the battle with a speed and power he had never known. The force of his emotions shocked even Maul, who found himself suddenly on the defensive, reeling beneath Obi-Wan's blows. But emotion, untempered, could only carry a warrior so far. Maul recovered quickly, countered, and with one crushing strike, sent Obi-Wan's lightsaber spinning into the abyss below. A second blow hurled the Padawan over the edge of the pit. Obi-Wan barely caught himself, fingers grasping a small ledge. As Maul stalked to the rim above, he dragged his lightsaber along the edge, sending sparks raining down like embers mocking the young Jedi's helplessness. But it was a mistake in that moment. Maul underestimated the bond between a Jedi and the Force. Obi-Wan calmed his breath, centered himself, reached out. Across the pit, Qui-Gon's fallen lightsaber trembled, then soared through the air into his waiting hand. With one powerful leap, Obi-Wan vaulted upward, flipping over Maul's head, igniting the green blade midair. Before the Sith could turn, Obi-Wan struck. A single, clean slash. Maul's eyes went wide as his body split at the waist. Silently, he tumbled into the abyss, below defeated but not destroyed. Obi-Wan didn't pause. He rushed to his master's side and fell to his knees, cradling him as life slipped away. Qui-Gon, barely conscious, raised a trembling hand to Obi-Wan's cheek. His voice was thin, barely a whisper, but every word carried the weight of destiny. He made his Padawan promise to train Anakin Skywalker, to ensure the boy's future, to believe in the prophecy and the will of the Force. Obi-Wan, choked with grief, nodded. "I promise, Master." And with those final words spoken, Qui-Gon Jinn let go. His breath faded, his body stilled, and his spirit became one with the Force. Naboo celebrated its freedom, but the Jedi mourned. A pyre was prepared in the night. Qui-Gon's body lay still upon the ceremonial platform, wrapped in honor. Fire rose, illuminating the silent faces gathered. Queen Amidala in her regal garb, the Jedi Council, Master Yoda, Master Windu, even the new Supreme Chancellor, Palpatine, was there, his face calm, unreadable, hiding the truth of the Sith Master behind it. But others were missing. Qui-Gon's former master, Count Dooku, and Jedi Master Yaddle, both absent for reasons few understood. Yaddle had followed Dooku to Coruscant, sensing something dark. She witnessed what few would ever know, a meeting between Dooku and Darth Sid, as Qui-Gon's body was consumed by flame. Obi-Wan stood beside Anakin Skywalker, now no longer a slave, but a boy with a future. The Council, perhaps moved by sacrifice or Sith revelation, had reversed their decision. Obi-Wan would train Anakin. He would keep the promise made in Qui-Gon's final breath. In that moment before fire and sky, Obi-Wan Kenobi stepped into a new life. Jedi Knight, Master, Guardian of the Chosen One. Qui-Gon's death echoed across the galaxy. Though the Council had often resisted him, they remembered him now as a warrior of the Force, a Jedi who had seen what others would not. To the people of Naboo, he was a hero. They built a shrine in his memory. To those who had known him, Yoda, the Wookiees of Kashyyyk, young Anakin, his loss was a wound that would never fully close, and far beyond the light of the pyre. In the shadows, Darth Sidious made new plans. The Sith had shown themselves, and though the apprentice had fallen, the Master remained, unseen and unchallenged. Yet, even in death, Qui-Gon Jinn was not finished, for death, as he had begun to understand, was not the end. He had once visited a world cloaked in mystery, a place of pure Force energy rumored to be the origin of midichlorians, the birthplace of life itself. He encountered 5 enigmatic beings, ancient, luminous, and beyond comprehension, known as the Force Priestesses. They had achieved something thought impossible. They had retained their conscious identity after death. From these mysterious beings, Qui-Gon Jinn learned a truth that had long been forgotten or ignored by the Jedi Order. The Force existed in two interwoven aspects: the living Force, which flowed through all living things in the present moment, and the cosmic Force, the boundless, eternal energy that held the galaxy together when a living being died. Their essence passed from the living Force into the cosmic Force, merging with the greater whole. But the priestesses revealed a further secret. Because these two aspects existed in tandem, it was possible if one was strong in the Force and possessed the right knowledge to retain individuality beyond death. The priestesses judged Qui-Gon worthy of this knowledge. Quietly and without fanfare, he began his training in this ancient path. But he did not stop there. He sought out a shaman of the wills, a keeper of deeper mysteries, who taught him an essential lesson: to maintain one's consciousness after death required not ambition, nor mastery, nor power, but complete, selfless surrender to the Force. One could not cling to identity out of fear. Only through total release could one paradoxically remain. Tragically, Qui-Gon's training remained incomplete by the time he fell on Naboo. Yet death was not the end for him. Somehow, despite his unfinished journey, he found a way to reach back into the living world. He could not manifest a visible form, not yet, but his voice, his presence, remained disembodied, ethereal. He reached out to those who could still hear. 10 years after the events on Naboo, Qui-Gon made his first known attempt to speak across the divide. Anakin Skywalker, now a Jedi Padawan under Obi-Wan's tutelage, had returned to Tatooine. Drawn by haunting dreams of his mother, he found Shmi brutalized and dying, kidnapped by Tusken raiders. And when she died in his arms, something inside him broke. Anakin gave in to the storm of his grief and fury, and slaughtered every soul in the raider camp. Qui-Gon felt the shattering disturbance in the Force. He cried out, pleading with Anakin to stop, to resist the darkness. From the depths of the cosmic realm, his voice reached out, anguished, urgent. Even Yoda, meditating in quiet solitude on Coruscant, heard it. But Anakin, consumed, would not listen. Later, he would convince himself that he had imagined it, that there had been no voice, no warning, no ghost of his better self reaching out through the Force. In the days that followed, as the galaxy fell into the fires of the Clone Wars, Anakin made a quiet journey back to Naboo. In a moment of guilt, a flicker of remorse, he visited Qui-Gon's shrine built to honor the Jedi who had once believed in him so deeply. There, Anakin reached out, longing for forgiveness, or perhaps reassurance. He heard nothing, but he felt a sudden stillness settle over him, a breath of peace in the middle of gathering war. He chose to believe it was Qui-Gon, a sign that things could still be set right. But it was not until the final days of the Clone Wars that Qui-Gon reached again, this time not to Anakin, but to Yoda, the ancient master. Troubled by visions and the deepening shadow of the dark side, heard a voice long thought lost, Qui-Gon's voice, calm, steady, full of truth. He guided Yoda to Dagobah, a place steeped in the living Force. As the first step in a greater journey, Yoda could hardly believe it. By all teachings, death was final. Yet here was Qui-Gon unseen, but present, real. Qui-Gon explained that, though his own training had been incomplete, he had learned how to retain his consciousness through the living Force. Under his guidance, Yoda traveled from Dagobah to a distant world where the Force priestesses awaited. They tested him, challenged his fears, questioned his intentions, and in the end, they deemed him worthy. It was Qui-Gon who would continue to guide Yoda's training in this deepest secret. This knowledge would become vital in the dark years to come, when the Republic fell and the Jedi perished, and hope seemed extinguished during the Clone Wars. Another strange encounter took place, and a place unlike any other in the galaxy, the planet Mortis. There, Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Ahsoka Tano found themselves pulled into the orbit of three powerful Force wielders, the father, the son, and the daughter, who believed Anakin to be the chosen one. On that ancient, mystic world, Qui-Gon appeared again, first to Obi-Wan, warning that these beings sought Anakin's power for their own ends. When Obi-Wan asked how this appearance was possible, Qui-Gon explained that Mortis acted as an amplifier, a conduit, where the Force flowed more freely between worlds. Later, he appeared to Anakin, reaffirming his belief in the young Jedi's destiny. Though the Council would later dismiss these visions as illusions, Anakin and Obi-Wan had seen something more, something real. Qui-Gon's presence, clear and luminous. Even after the Republic collapsed and the Jedi were hunted, Qui-Gon continued his quiet vigil. Before going into exile, Yoda told Obi-Wan that Qui-Gon had returned from the netherworld of the Force, that he would guide him, train him, help him learn to transcend death. But on Tatooine, Obi-Wan struggled. In the years that followed, watching over Luke Skywalker from the shadows, he often reached out. He spoke aloud. He waited for answers. But guilt clouded his connection. The fall of Anakin haunted him. He could not forgive himself and so could not hear Qui-Gon clearly. But Qui-Gon was there, always there. In 16 BBY, when Luke was only 3 years old, Qui-Gon whispered across the sands, warning Obi-Wan of bandits preparing to strike the Lars homestead. Years later, in 9 BBY, after Obi-Wan had faced Darth Vader once again and, at last, begun to forgive himself, Qui-Gon finally appeared in full. It happened near Beggar's Canyon. Obi-Wan, weary and worn, rode quietly across the desert when he saw a shimmer. A familiar presence, Qui-Gon, smiling, peaceful. "Present, I was always here, Obi-Wan," he said gently. "You just weren't ready to see." From that day forward, they were together again, not as master and Padawan, but as equals. Qui-Gon became Obi-Wan's guide, companion, and anchor through the long, lonesome years. When the Wookiee bounty hunter Kersantan attacked, it was Qui-Gon's steady presence that gave Obi-Wan the strength to endure, and in the end aboard the Death Star. When Obi-Wan faced Darth Vader one final time, he completed the training Qui-Gon had begun. He let go, he surrendered, and in doing so became one with the Force. Yoda too, in his final days, passed quietly from life into the Force, retaining his consciousness. Qui-Gon had taught them both what no Jedi had known for 1,000 years, that death could be transcended, not through power, but through peace, through love, through surrender. This hidden knowledge passed down from the Force priestesses to Qui-Gon, and from him to Yoda and Obi-Wan would guide Luke Skywalker in the years to come. It would shape his journey, his decisions, and ultimately the fate of the galaxy. And in the end, the greatest vindication of Qui-Gon's faith came when Anakin Skywalker Darth Vader turned back to the light, when he saved his son, when he destroyed the Emperor and fulfilled the ancient prophecy. Balance was restored. The Sith were ended. The Chosen One had risen in his final moments. Anakin too found redemption, and because of Qui-Gon's teachings, he found a path into the Force. His consciousness, too, endured. Qui-Gon's influence even touched those who had never known him. Luke Skywalker, searching for the lost ways of the Jedi, studied Qui-Gon's life. He came to understand the deep connection between this Jedi so often ignored by the Council and his own family's destiny. Luke would come to consider Qui-Gon part of the Skywalker legacy, and even decades later, during the final battle on Exegol in 35 Abai, when Rey stood alone against the resurrected Emperor, she heard the voices of all the Jedi who had come before. Among them was Qui-Gon Jinn, his spirit still echoing in the Force, telling her that every Jedi who ever lived stood with her, that she was never alone. Perhaps that is Qui-Gon's greatest legacy, the understanding that death is not the end, that the Force binds all things, that those we lose are never truly gone. His belief in the living Force, his defiance of rigid doctrine, his discovery of consciousness beyond death, these things changed the very soul of what it meant to be a Jedi. The maverick who often stood alone, preserved the wisdom of the Order through its darkest age. The man who believed in a prophecy others dismissed, ensured it would come true. The Master who trained Obi-Wan Kenobi continued teaching long after his own death, guided by the Force. Qui-Gon Jinn chose his own path in life and in death, walked beside those who still listened. His journey did not end on Naboo. It echoed across generations, a whisper in the Force, a spark of light, a legacy of hope.